These American giants never roared. They glided, in total silence, at speeds that embarrassed cars twice as loud. If you love hidden automotive history, subscribe now, because today on Britain Rewind we're counting down 10 silent speed machines of 1970s American luxury. Stay for number 1, it still holds a record nobody's broken. Let's start with number 10. Number 10, Buick Electra 225. The Electra 225 earned its name honestly, 225 inches of steel gliding down the interstate like it owned every lane it touched. That's nearly 19 feet of American engineering, longer than most modern SUVs stretched to their absolute limit, and Buick built every inch of it for executives who wanted to arrive somewhere without ever announcing that they'd left in the first place. Underneath that acreage of hood sat a 455 cubic inch V8, an engine so relaxed at highway speed it barely seemed to notice the car's own considerable weight. Buick's engineers weren't chasing lap times. They were chasing something far harder to measure: the total elimination of unwanted sensation. The cabin was tuned for silence above almost everything else: thick multi-layer door seals, isolated subframes bolted through rubber bushings designed specifically to absorb harshness before it ever reached the passenger compartment, glass so heavy and so precisely fitted that wind noise at 70 miles an hour dropped to something closer to a library. Most people don't know this, but Buick's engineering division reportedly spent more development hours on cabin acoustics for the Electra than on the drivetrain itself, running dozens of iterations of door seal compounds and floor pan insulation layers before settling on the final configuration. It wasn't fast in the traditional, exciting sense. It was inevitable. Acceleration arrived not as a jolt but as a gradual, unstoppable momentum, the kind that builds so smoothly you only really notice your speed when you glance at the dial. The Electra's suspension deserves its own mention too. Buick's engineers specified unusually soft spring rates paired with generously sized anti-roll bars, a combination designed to soak up expansion joints in pavement seams almost entirely before they ever reached the passenger compartment. Combined with power steering tuned for minimal effort, parking one of these enormous sedans required almost no physical exertion at all, a genuinely novel sensation for drivers used to wrestling smaller, stiffer cars into tight spaces. Can you imagine merging onto a freeway and never once hearing your own engine work for it? Number 9. Chrysler Imperial LeBaron. By the early 1970s, the Imperial LeBaron had become Chrysler's answer to a very specific and very expensive question: what happens when you build a car with absolutely no compromises whatsoever? The interior used more leather than most contemporary cars used steel in their entire bodywork, hand-fitted, hand-stitched, offered in color combinations that read more like an interior design catalog than a factory options list. The 440 cubic inch V8 produced torque figures that made smaller, flashier sports cars from the same era look almost apologetic by comparison. This wasn't an engine built to rev, it was built to shove, delivering its power in one long, continuous wave from almost idle speed. Few remember how genuinely advanced its electronic components were for the era, either. The Imperial's cornering lamps, which activated automatically to illuminate the direction of an upcoming turn, and its early electronic ignition system, wouldn't become standard features across the wider industry for another decade at minimum. The ride was famously, almost comically, isolated. Some period owners described the sensation of driving one as being sealed inside a soundproofed room that happened to be moving. Bumps that would jolt a smaller car simply vanished, absorbed somewhere between the enormous coil springs and the deliberately soft shock tuning. It never tried to feel sporty, never tried to communicate the road back to the driver's hands. It tried to feel like nothing in the outside world could touch you, and by nearly every account, it succeeded completely. Chrysler positioned the Imperial as a genuine rival to Cadillac and Lincoln, and for buyers who wanted something rarer, something their neighbors were less likely to already own, it made a compelling case. Production numbers stayed deliberately low throughout the model's run, which only added to its exclusivity among buyers who valued scarcity as much as comfort. This is the part enthusiasts today often skip over entirely, focused as they are on horsepower figures that never told the real story about what these cars were actually engineered to deliver. Number 8. Mercury Marquis Brougham. The Marquis Brougham spent most of its life existing quietly in the shadow of its more famous Lincoln cousins, and that shadow, strangely enough, worked entirely in its favor. Mercury borrowed the same full-size platform, the same isolated ride characteristics, the same commanding road presence, and sold the entire package for meaningfully less money than the equivalent Lincoln badge would have demanded. Under the hood, buyers could specify a 429 or later a 460 cubic inch V8, both delivering effortless highway pull, the kind that never required flooring the accelerator to feel genuinely authoritative in traffic. Most people don't know this, but period automotive reviews frequently noted, sometimes with visible surprise, that the Marquis actually rode more smoothly over broken pavement than cars costing several $1,000s more at the time, a genuinely embarrassing comparison for some of its pricier rivals. Owners of the Marquis Brougham weren't chasing horsepower numbers on a spec sheet. They were chasing a very specific sensation, the feeling of a car that simply refused to be disturbed by whatever the road happened to be doing beneath it. Potholes, expansion joints, uneven interstate seams, all of it seemed to happen to some other car entirely. Inside, the Marquis leaned heavily into velour and simulated wood trim, materials that read as genuinely upscale to buyers who never needed to compare them directly against the real leather and real walnut found in pricier badges parked one showroom floor away. Mercury understood its position in the market precisely: offer 90% of the sensation for meaningfully less money, and let the remaining 10% become somebody else's marketing problem. Stick around, because this list only gets quieter and considerably more expensive from here. Number 7. Oldsmobile Toronado. The Toronado did something genuinely radical for full-size American luxury at the time. It sent all of its power to the front wheels rather than the rear. Launched in the late 1960s and carried forward confidently through the 1970s with continuous refinement, it paired a 455 cubic inch V8 with front-wheel drive, an engineering combination almost nobody else in America was seriously attempting at this size, weight, and price point. The result was a car that pulled itself forward with unusual, almost unnerving composure. Less wheel hop under hard acceleration, less rear-end squat, more of that eerie, effortless glide that defined this entire generation of cars. Few remember just how genuinely difficult this engineering feat was to package correctly. Routing that much torque through the front wheels, in a car this heavy, without destroying the drivetrain or inducing violent torque steer, required Oldsmobile's engineers to develop entirely new constant velocity joint designs, essentially building the technical foundation that later front-wheel drive vehicles across the entire industry would eventually borrow from. The styling matched the engineering ambition step for step. Low, wide, and dramatically uninterrupted by anything resembling a conventional grille opening, the Toronado's front end looked almost sealed, futuristic in a way that period concept cars rarely managed to translate into actual showroom reality. Inside the cabin, that front-wheel drive layout paid off in a way few buyers expected, a genuinely flat floor with no central transmission tunnel intruding into the footwells. 6 passengers could sit across 2 bench seats in real comfort, something no rear-wheel drive competitor of similar size could offer without compromise. It looked like nothing else on the road in 1970, and mechanically, it drove like nothing else either. Number 6. Cadillac Fleetwood Brougham. The Fleetwood Brougham was Cadillac's clearest possible statement that sheer size itself could function as a genuine luxury feature, not just an incidental byproduct of the era's design language. Riding on the longest wheelbase available anywhere in the entire Cadillac lineup, it offered rear legroom that rivaled small living rooms. Genuinely, some period reviewers made exactly that comparison without any apparent irony. The 472 and later 500 cubic inch V8 engines produced torque so genuinely abundant that acceleration felt less like effort and more like polite suggestion. You didn't floor a Fleetwood Brougham so much as gently indicate to it that a faster pace might be appreciated, and it obliged smoothly. Most people don't know this, but the 500 cubic inch unit fitted to certain Cadillac models during this period remains, to this day, among the largest displacement V8 engines ever fitted to a genuinely mass-production American passenger car, a record that has essentially never been seriously challenged since. Everything about the Fleetwood Brougham was engineered specifically to insulate its occupants, from vibration, from ambient noise, from the physical sensation of speed itself, even while the car was, by any objective measure, moving remarkably fast for its considerable mass. Cadillac offered a dedicated d'elegance trim on top of the already generous Brougham specification, adding pillow-style seating, extra brightwork, and even more sound-deadening material layered beneath the carpet and headliner. Chauffeur-driven examples were common enough that Cadillac specifically engineered the rear seating position with its own climate controls, its own reading lamps, and its own considerations entirely separate from the driver's environment up front. It was a car deliberately built to make velocity feel indistinguishable from stillness, a genuinely strange and specific engineering goal that this era of American luxury pursued with total, unwavering seriousness. Number 5. Lincoln Continental Mark IV. The Mark IV arrived as pure, unapologetic theater, an opera window here, a vinyl-covered roof there, chrome trim applied with what can only be described as genuine enthusiasm rather than restraint. But underneath all of that theatrical presentation sat genuinely serious hardware, a 460 cubic inch V8 producing enormous low-end torque, paired with a suspension tuned almost exclusively for isolation rather than any pretense of sporting feedback. Few remember how competitive the Mark IV actually was against its European rivals in a straight line, despite weighing considerably more than nearly all of them. The steering was deliberately light, almost disconcertingly so to a driver expecting resistance. The brakes were deliberately soft in their initial bite. Every single input a driver could make was smoothed, filtered, and softened into something that felt almost dreamlike rather than mechanical. It wasn't built for canyon roads, and Lincoln never pretended otherwise in its marketing. It was built for boulevards, for grand entrances outside hotels and restaurants, for the specific, deliberate pleasure of arriving somewhere important without a single hair out of place or a single wrinkle in an expensive suit. The Mark IV also became something of a cultural signal during its production run, a car photographed outside recording studios, sports arenas, and film sets with genuine regularity. Its sheer visual presence, that long hood, that formal vinyl roof, that unmistakable spare tire hump pressed into the trunk lid, made it instantly recognizable even to people with no particular interest in cars whatsoever. The Mark IV understood exactly what its buyers wanted, and it never once apologized for prioritizing that experience over anything resembling sportiness. Number 4. Pontiac Grand Ville. The Grand Ville sat at the very top of Pontiac's entire lineup, and it wore that position with genuine, visible confidence. Built on General Motors' full-size B-body platform but stretched and further softened specifically for maximum comfort, it paired a 455 cubic inch V8 with a suspension calibrated almost entirely for cushioning rather than any meaningful cornering ability. Most people don't know this, but the Grand Ville convertible remains one of the very last full-size American convertibles ever produced before the body style itself briefly disappeared from the market entirely later in the decade, a genuine historical footnote that collectors now take quite seriously. The cabin prioritized space and softness above nearly every other consideration, deep, wide seats upholstered in materials chosen specifically for comfort over durability, thick plush carpeting underfoot, an almost total absence of road feel transmitted anywhere near the driver's hands. It was Pontiac's clearest possible argument that performance and comfort weren't actually opposites at all, they were simply different definitions of the exact same underlying word. Pontiac also equipped the Grand Ville with a notably hushed interior for a division better known for performance-oriented models like the GTO and Firebird. Extra sound deadening in the firewall and floor pan, along with thicker glass than lesser Pontiac models, helped the Grand Ville hold its own against full-size offerings from Buick and Oldsmobile parked on the very same showroom floors. A Grand Ville owner would have scoffed at the idea that their car wasn't a performance vehicle, it simply performed a different job than a muscle car did, and it performed that specific job better than almost anything else available at the time. Number 3. Lincoln Continental Mark V. By 1977, Lincoln had refined the Mark formula into something genuinely remarkable, a car measuring nearly 19 feet in overall length that still somehow felt composed and controlled at real highway speed. The Mark V shed genuine, measurable weight compared to its immediate predecessor while keeping both the 400 and 460 cubic inch V8 engine options available, and the result was noticeably improved responsiveness without sacrificing a single ounce of that signature Lincoln isolation. Few remember how meticulously Lincoln's engineers tuned the suspension bushings specifically to filter out road imperfections before they ever had a chance to reach the cabin, testing dozens of rubber compounds across different climates and road surfaces before finalizing the specification. It became one of the best-selling personal luxury cars of the entire decade, moving in numbers that genuinely surprised even Lincoln's own sales projections at launch. Its success proved something that the rest of this list has been demonstrating all along, That silence, when engineered correctly and pursued with total seriousness, sells just as effectively as raw speed ever could. Lincoln also used the Mark V to introduce a wider range of designer editions, special trims developed in collaboration with fashion houses like Givenchy, Cartier, Pucci, and Bill Blass, each offering unique paint and interior combinations unavailable anywhere else. It was an unusual strategy for a car company, but it worked, turning already exclusive hardware into something that felt genuinely bespoke to the buyers who could afford to specify one. Buyers weren't comparing the Mark V's quarter-mile time against anything. They were comparing the sensation of stepping out of it after a 3-hour drive feeling exactly as fresh as when they'd started. Number 2. Cadillac Eldorado. The Eldorado of the 1970s stood as Cadillac's flagship statement of pure engineering confidence, front-wheel drive on a genuinely massive scale, enormous, dramatic proportions, and a 500 cubic inch V8 that remains, to this very day, the largest displacement V8 engine ever installed in a regular, genuinely mass-market production car anywhere in automotive history. Most people don't know this, but that specific displacement record has genuinely never been broken by another mass-market manufacturer in the decades since, making the Eldorado's engine bay a strange, permanent footnote in engineering history that even serious car enthusiasts frequently overlook. The Eldorado convertible, reintroduced with considerable fanfare in 1976, was marketed quite deliberately as the last American convertible, and buyers responded with real, tangible urgency. Some dealerships reportedly maintained genuine waiting lists, with certain buyers paying well above the sticker price simply to guarantee delivery before production ended. Several examples were reportedly bought purely as investments, driven only a handful of miles before being stored away under the assumption that values would only climb once the model officially left production, a surprisingly modern kind of speculation for a car built in the middle of the 1970s. It combined genuine engineering ambition, that record-setting displacement, that complex front-wheel drive layout, with pure theatrical presence, a car that fundamentally didn't need to prove anything on a racetrack because the numbers underneath its hood had already proven it conclusively. Cadillac's engineers also fitted the Eldorado with some of the largest front disc brakes available on any American car of the period, a genuinely necessary addition given the vehicle's substantial curb weight. Combined with a widened track and a lower center of gravity than most full-size Cadillacs, the Eldorado actually handled with more composure through sweeping turns than its enormous dimensions suggested it should. The Eldorado didn't just sell luxury. It sold a specific, very American kind of engineering bravado that few other manufacturers anywhere in the world were even attempting at the time. Number 1. Lincoln Continental Mark III. And here we are, number 1. The Mark III didn't just define personal luxury for Lincoln as a brand, it arguably redefined the entire American luxury segment when it first launched in 1968 and carried its considerable influence deep into the following decade, shaping nearly every competitor that followed in its wake. Its 460 cubic inch V8 delivered effortlessly smooth torque, but the real engineering and design achievement lived almost everywhere else across the car. The hidden headlamps, concealed behind smooth body panels until activated. The unmistakable, deliberately Rolls-Royce-inspired vertical grille, a design decision so bold it genuinely startled some contemporary reviewers. An interior isolated so thoroughly from external road noise that owners genuinely struggled, by their own accounts, to accurately describe the sensation to friends who hadn't personally experienced it firsthand. Few remember that the Mark III actually outsold its primary European luxury rival, the Continental it was directly positioned against, by a genuinely considerable margin almost immediately following launch, a sales result that reportedly surprised even Lincoln's own executives. The Mark III also helped establish the entire personal luxury coupe segment as a serious, lasting category rather than a passing trend, directly inspiring the Mark IV and Mark V that followed it, along with countless rivals from Cadillac, Buick, and Chrysler that spent the rest of the decade chasing the formula it had established. Every single other car on this list, in some meaningful sense, exists because the Mark III proved the formula worked first. It proved something that this entire decade would go on to demonstrate again and again across every single car on this list, that true American luxury never needed to be loud in order to be completely unforgettable. Truly a machine that changed the conversation around what luxury actually meant, entirely and permanently. The 1970s produced some of the most genuinely misunderstood cars in American automotive history, dismissed today by casual observers for their size and their considerable thirst for fuel, but engineered with real, deliberate, obsessive purpose by people who understood exactly what their buyers wanted. These weren't cars built to impress anyone at a stoplight. They were built to disappear beneath you almost entirely while doing something genuinely remarkable underneath, absorbing a chaotic world so thoroughly that their occupants barely noticed it was there. Most people only remember the fuel crisis and the chrome when they think about this decade. Now you know what these machines were actually capable of, and just how much genuine engineering ambition was hiding beneath all that vinyl and velour. It's worth remembering just how contradictory this decade actually was. The oil crisis hit in 1973, fuel prices tripled almost overnight, and yet Detroit kept building enormous, thirsty, magnificently over-engineered land yachts right through the worst of it. Buyers kept lining up anyway, because these cars weren't really selling horsepower, they were selling total control, total silence, total insulation from a world that was getting louder and more chaotic by the year. Watergate dominated the news. Inflation climbed every quarter. For the buyers who could afford them, cars like these became a kind of rolling refuge, a sealed, climate-controlled bubble that made all of it disappear for the length of a commute. It's worth remembering, too, that almost none of this technology or philosophy survived the decade that followed unchanged. As fuel economy regulations tightened through the early 1980s, manufacturers were forced to shrink these cars dramatically, trading displacement for efficiency and isolation for weight savings. The genuinely enormous engines featured on this list, several of them still holding displacement records that have never been broken, effectively became relics of a very specific, very brief window in American manufacturing history, a moment when engineers were given genuine freedom to build without meaningful compromise. That window closed quickly, and it never really opened again in quite the same way. If you enjoy the real, unvarnished truth behind America's automotive history, subscribe to Britain Rewind and never miss a story. And here's a question for you. Which of these silent giants would you actually want to drive today? Tell us down below. We'll see you in the next amazing video.